Hello friends, in this video I will talk about how you can go about taking control of an interview. Now the question that comes to mind is, what do I mean by taking control of the interview and how do we go about taking control of the interview? Now let's start with what do I mean by taking control of the interview. The idea here is that instead of the interviewer following a certain pattern, you take control of the interview in such a way that you divert the discussion where you want it to go. And the reason you want to do this is because you want to move the interviewer and the discussion towards the areas where you feel strong, the areas of your strength as against the areas of your weakness. Because the interviewer will be asking you random questions. There might be some questions which are your area of strength and you can talk at length about them. And there might be some questions where you don't feel very strong. And hence the idea is that you focus more on the area of strength as against the area of weakness, and hence try to divert the discussion towards the area of strength as against the area of weakness or opportunity. Because when you apply for a job, it will never be the case that you 100% match every detail that is required of the job. So let's say there are 10 key details that are required or 10 key requirements of a particular job. You may not fit all of them. You may at best fit 6 or 7 of those requirements. How do you make sure that during the interview you only keep the interviewer engaged and involved in those top 6 and only brush on the balance 4 just because if they get asked? Otherwise, just stick to those 6 where you think you're strong, the skills that you bring in, things that you can talk about, as against just talking about the 10 things randomly and with equal weightage. Now before we move forward, one call out. I have 2 requests for you. One is press the like button, as this keeps me motivated to produce more similar content. Second, press the subscribe button so you get notified as soon as I put a new content on this channel. Now on this channel, I post content pertaining to career and financial success for early and mid-career professionals. Now let's get rolling back into the video. Number 1 tip is to make sure you're prepared. And when I say prepared, I just don't mean preparing for the interview. You should always prepare for the interview, but you should always prepare for the fact that how do you take control of the interview, which is that you need to know what are those 3 to 4 things that are a no miss. Like by any means, you have to talk about them because these are 3 or 4 things which highlight you, your career, your achievements, and make you look good like anything else in the interview. And hence you need to make sure that you bring those 3-4 elements in. But before you bring those 3-4 elements in, you need to know what those 3-4 elements are. So make sure you list them down, that these are the things that are no miss. So for instance, for me, it would be talking about how am I a fast learner, and I have certain examples around that. How I know e-commerce. Let's say the role that I'm applying for requires e-commerce skills. How do I do in people management? Again, if the idea is that the role requires people management, I need to make sure I talk about that. And it's not just that the role is requiring these skills, it's also that these are the areas of my strength. E-commerce, being a fast learner, managing people, these are my strengths. I can talk about them at length for hours. So make sure you have that list ready, because by the time the interview is halfway or let's say getting done, you need to quickly check on that list and make sure that all these 3 points were covered. Either they were covered because the interviewer was asking you about them, or if they were not covered that way, then the following tip will help you weed in those skills and examples in your answers or in your interview in a way that you make sure that you talk about them. So let's go to tip number 2. Now the next tip is have a catchy intro. Because the intro is the first part of the interview. It is usually the first 5 minutes of the interview. And if you ace these first 5 minutes, if you make them interesting for the interviewer, then my friend, you have really caught their attention, caught their eye, caught their ear for the rest of the hour that you are there in the interview. And what do I mean by catchy intro is not just running down through your resume, but making sure that you tell a story about yourself, about your personality, about your character, and also weed in some of the achievements that you have done, which may be highlighted on the resume, but only bits and pieces of this. You need to not just talk about the resume, but talk about yourself. I made a separate video on this topic where I talk about how to answer this question, which is, by the way, one of the most underprepared questions in the interview, because people think that this is a question I can simply answer, talk about my resume, take you through my resume. But it's not just that. You really need to introduce your personality, introduce yourself. So make sure you check out that video where I talk about how you can go about answering the question where the It goes, tell me about yourself. Now you had the best intro. So the interviewer is all eyes, all ears. What should you do next? Next, try to make sure you make use of your best example from your work experience first. Don't keep it till the end. Like you are already at a high. Just keep going higher and higher in the interview, because once you've used those top examples, now after that, let's say half of the interview has passed, even if you start sharing some of the less good examples, it is still fine, because now the interviewer is all praise. He's already in love with you. You started with the catchy intro. You brought in your best example. Now I know and I understand that you also need to make sure you don't answer or give an answer which is completely different from what the question is. So if the question is about that example, which is your best example, try to weed it in, try to use it. If it is just too far, let's say if the person is asking you about an analytical question where you've done an analysis and your best example is about conflict, obviously you can't use it. But if that conflict example does have some analysis to it and you did some great job, make sure you use it. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, no matter what the question is, as long as the question falls in the umbrella with which you can serve the example, tailor your best example and use your best example first. Don't hold on to your best example for the later. Second is pivot from the question. Now, this needs to be done smartly. This is how politicians do. When they are asked a question, they will give a short answer to the question, but then they will explore and expand towards the area of their strength. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say someone asks you about a question where you jumped into a team and the team was in disarray and they were not motivated, and you kind of helped them out, showed them the vision, and were successful, eventually achieving whatever the project the team was working on. Now, you might think you don't have a strong example here. It's not the area of your strength, but this is a very direct question where you jumped into a team and solved it. So you have to say something. So you use a weak example, you answer this question. You answer this question because it's a weak example, you can't spend more than 2 or 3 minutes on this answer. But as soon as you're done answering, say, I have another example, or I have something more to say. And here you can add something which is similar to the question asked, but not exactly the same. However, it's an area of your strength. So you can say, there was this one individual who was about to get fired, and the previous manager lost all hope in him or her. And when I took over that role, they assigned me that person and said, you can just simply fire him or get rid of him because he's not up to the mark. But I took it as a personal challenge to make sure that if that guy has passion, if the guy has the right attitude and the right personality, because for me, passion, personality, attitude is far more important than skill, then I can teach him or her anything. And that's what I decided. I connected with the guy and I realized that he has all the passion, all the attitude. So I said, okay, I'm ready to invest in this person. And then I sat with him days and nights, over weeks, weekends and weekdays, and tried to polish his skills, work on his skills, and eventually was able to make him a success. So someone who was about to get fired just because people were not ready to invest in him, I was that one individual who saw a spark, who saw the right attitude, the right personality and passion in him, and was able to develop him into a stronger manager. And he went on to be a very successful person and had a very successful career. Now, I say this as a second example. So I answered the first one, but I didn't have a strong example in that. But this is my strong area where I really worked on this individual and I take pride in it. And hence, once I've given the main answer, I pivot into the area of my strength and say, here's another thing that I want to share with you on the similar lines. And then you move them in the area of your strength. This technique is also called building the bridge. So let me give another example. Let's say the interviewer asks you, can you tell me why do you have this gap on your resume? And you go like, yes, I have this gap on my resume because I went back to studying. However, during this time, I was not just studying. Rather, I was also working on this project in my local community. And then you start talking about that project and how you led the project and what was the great leadership you showed in the project and what was the outcome. So the idea is you answer their particular question, but eventually and ultimately you move to the area of your strength and talk about things you want to talk about so that you look good, as against just saying, oh yes, I have a gap on my resume because I went studying. Okay. But now this is another opportunity for you to bring in the area of your strength, which is you worked on a local community project and this is what you brought in. Next is the importance of understanding the question behind the question. So for instance, if someone is asking you a question, which is, can you give me an example where you worked on a project which required you to connect and organize work with different teams across the globe or across the company? How did you go about it? And let's say you really don't have a strong example here, because the examples you have are very either shallow or you really didn't work across the globe in your organization. So what you can simply do is first understand why they're asking this question. They're asking this question is because they have a matrix organization and they expect you to work across different functions in that matrix organization. So they want to make sure whether you know how to navigate through a matrix organization. So you can use a weak example again and tell them that there was a certain project where you worked across different functions, but then just don't stop there. And then add on top that I understand that your organization is a matrix organization and this is a very key part for this role. And hence I want to tell you that for me to work in a matrix organization, it is very important for me to know where the answer lies. So who knows what? So whenever there's a question, because I will not have all the answers to all the questions, but I want to make sure that I know where to get those answers from. So what I will do is I'll first try to understand the org structure, try to understand where the answers lie, who does what, and then connect with those people, develop a bond with them, develop a relationship with them, understand what priorities they are working on, and is there any way I can help them. So this way I understand the organization, I understand where different people are, how they can help me, connect with them, develop a bond with them, and then when a situation arises where I need their help, it would be very easy for me to reach out to them because I understand where they are, I understand what they do, and I've already developed a connection with them. So the point is, while you give a short example, which is, you can just say, yes, I've worked in projects where I had to work across the functions and I've worked on numerous projects, but let me tell you how I do work on those projects where I can exploit all those external help within the organization or in other functions. So this way it's like you understanding what is the question behind the question and then answering the question behind the question in a way that you can satisfy the individual that even if you don't have a great example, you know what you're doing and you will be a success coming in their organization. Another tip is make sure whenever you give an example, you don't share facts, you tell a story. And I always say this, like from my school years as well, what I remember in my school is the stories that were told. And I don't remember any of the formulas that I memorized the day before the exam. So make sure that you tell a story so the interviewer remembers you when they're done with the interview, because they won't remember any of the facts. So this is just a point to make sure you make the interview interesting, because when you start telling story, you become the storyteller and everyone is like all ears and all eyes and listening to you and enjoying what you're saying. And suddenly you control the interview as well in this way, because you are creating a situation for them to enjoy this moment, this 1 hour that they are in with you, and they want to listen more and more of your stories. And hence you being in the area of your strength and you commanding the interview. Lastly, let's assume you had those 3-4 skills or 3-4 strengths written down and you realize you're reaching towards the end of the interview and you only covered 3 and there is 1 still missing, or you only covered 2 and there is still 1 missing. Then you make use of the last 5 minutes where the interviewer puts the interview or reverses the table for you, where they say, can you tell me if you have any questions for us? And this is where you ask a question in a way where you make them say something where you can use that particular skill back in. One way of doing this is maybe asking them, what do you think success looks like for this person you will hire in this role in 1 year down the lane? And suddenly they want to talk about the key strengths or the key things or the key achievements they want this individual to deliver in a year's time. And as they start talking about it, you can pick the ones which you think you can talk about or expand on or are area of your strength, and then jump onto it and say, oh yeah, you mentioned that this individual should be someone who can come in the team and develop the team. Guess what? I've had this experience previously in my company where I went into a new team and I developed a team from scratch, or there was a new business unit that was created and I worked on that business unit and created the team from scratch. Or let's say, if they say they expect this individual to come and develop certain programs, and you can quickly jump on to say, oh yeah, I have done this in my previous experience as well, where there was a system required. We had an option of either outsourcing the system or producing it in-house, and I decided to just create or code that system and prepare that system in-house for the company. So this is how you can kind of latch on to whatever the interviewer believes is success for the individual they're hiring in this role, latch on to that particular point and then bring them back to your strength. So essentially, you're not asking this question to really know about the success this individual or the things that this individual is expected to deliver. You are just making sure you've not missed anything. So for this, I've made a separate video where I talk about how you should go about answering or taking charge or acing this question, which is when the tables are reversed. So check out the video where the interviewer asks you to ask questions of them. See how you should go about questioning the interviewer in a way that you look good. Hopefully you found value from this video. In case you did, I'm sure you'll also find value from another video which I prepared on how to answer behavioral questions. Here's a link to that video. Other than that, there is another video which I prepared where I talk about how to handle questions for which you don't have an answer at all. So check out that video here. Thank you.